And a very good afternoon. This is vk3sl. I thought I was let off the hook today. I was looking at the SDR and listening on the wireless, and there was somebody on the frequency. It's so rare. Activity up the band, it just doesn't happen. Maybe, I think 160 metres is becoming the new 80 metres actually. So a bit of activity, and I thought, well, this is great, I can go and do other things. But they QS wide to 80, so there was the spot vacant again, had to be filled. So that's what happens. We fill the void here. These are the Corona missions, late afternoon sessions, and vk3sl testing, of course, nothing else. Don't get too highfalutin about this. We are not doing anything about entertainment at all, unless you listen on the stream. Streaming service on YouTube. That's where to go if you want to be entertained. Otherwise, this is strictly a tone test service. Anyhow, I should remind people that tonight, late tonight, we do have our extended late night missions. I'm hoping everything's going to hold up today. We had a technical failure last night. It was quite spectacular. Big storm and a fuse blew, and then I put a new fuse in and that blew, and I thought, this is it. We won't be able to do anything. But I realised that it was actually the fuse holder. It was getting very, very hot and it was disintegrating. So I had to put a new fuse, whole new interface in there. So that's what happened. We did that late last night, got everything sorted. So I'm hopefully it'll uphold and it'll be okay. So I'll be just testing the temperature today. And with any luck, we'll have a workable situation tonight. All right, let's kick off with something authentic. I've got a Scott Wood record. What is it? Scott Wood and his sextet. I wonder if this one features Marjorie Stedford. Don't know. We'll soon find out. Scott Wood and the band from the late 1930s on a Regal Zonophone. Let's hold it up and see if there's any other information here. No vocalist on that side. Yes, Scott Wood and his Six Swingers. And yeah, it's one of the later Regal Zonophones, pre-war though. Let's have a look. Side B has got the organ grind... Excuse me, I've been eating nuts. The organ grinder swing. All right, well, I think we'll play side B, have a listen. I don't know who the vocalist is on this. I know Marjorie Stedford made recordings with Scott Wood. So, you never know, but we're only one way to find out. Whoops, in the groove. This is vk3sl testing.
Down the street, it's good old organ grinder Pete. He's the latest rhythm king with his organ grinder swing. Da-ya, 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 da-ya. When he turns that handle down, music goes around and round. Everybody starts to sing to that organ grinder swing. Tra-la, 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 tra-la. All the children tag along just to listen to his song. Monkey dances on a string to the organ grinder swing. Oh, hum, oh, hum, oh, hum. Oh,
Just heard Scott Wood and his Six Swingsters. Now, interestingly, the anthology says that's Connie Russell singing on that record. Now, Connie Russell was born in 1923. And if that record was made in 1937, she would have been extremely young. I wonder. I think that warrants some investigation. Anyhow, we'll have a Corona special now. Another record. We've dug up another recording of the Corona Dance Orchestra, a pseudonym for bands recording on the cheap Columbia label, the Regal label in the 1920s. And in this instance, we've got the Savoy Havana Band recording in 1925. It is an acoustic, but let's have a listen to the Corona Dance Orchestra with Come On, Red, You've Red Hot Devil... What's it? Come On, Red, You Red Hot Devil Man. That's the name of the song. VK3SL testing. go. There was our Corona special for the day. The Savoy Havana Band from 1925. This is vk3sl. Test missions on 160 metres. Afternoon session, and we are just rolling 78s here. And we'll be back tonight with something far more comprehensive. We'll hopefully have Frank with us, and Frank, VK3JR, and myself, VK3SL, will be presenting something interesting, I'm sure. Well, something novel. We'll go on a journey of discovery. That's what will happen. And we'll open up the vaults, and something will materialise. There'll be the Pandora's box, or whatever they call it, the genie out of the bottle. Is that the term? All right, well, I've got to go inside. I'm on dinner duty tonight. There's a lot happening in this household, and I sort of squeeze these missions in between other activities, but I'm always listening inside, and I've got to sort out the meal for a lot of people. So I'm going to go and start cooking, but I like 20s dance band music. I've got a bit of a thing about that, and particularly British bands. So we're going to hear an aggregate file of British dance bands of 1925. Now let's have a look at the list. We've got Jack Hilton, Ray Starita, Jack Padbury's Cosmo Club 6. I look forward to that. Tommy Kinsman, Harry Bigwood's Broadcasters, and the Four Bright Sparks. All recordings made in 1929. So, for the next 17 minutes, while I chop up the onions, let's have a listen to British dance bands of 1929. I'm VK3SL, testing on 160.
Wake up and end the day thinking of you. Oh, why does it do this to me? Is it such bliss to be thinking of you? And when I fall asleep at night, it seems you just tiptoe into all my dreams. So I think of no other one ever since I've begun thinking of you.
of the painted doll. It's a jolly day, the news is spreading all around the hall. Red Riding Hood and Buster Brown, the jumping jack, jumped into town. From far and near, they're coming here. Church bells ringing, ringing, all the little dollies from the follies with their painted cheeks. Little Mammy Doll has fussed around for weeks and weeks. Shoo the blues, no time to lose. Rice and shoes will spread the news that it's a holiday. Today's the wedding of the little painted doll.
saving all my loving for somebody I know, and that somebody I know loves me. When I'm asleep, the birdies peep a love song or two about nobody but you, lucky old me. Every time I hear the doorbell ring, ting-a-ling, my heart gets jumpy, knees go bumpy, and everything. Though savings bank is big enough to hold all the love I'm saving for you. Every time I hear the doorbell ring, ting-a-ling, my heart gets jumpy, knees go bumpy, and everything. Talk about your classy darlings that you don't see in the parlors. Is she that way lovable and sweet? No one else can hold a candle. What a precious thing to handle. Is she that way lovable and sweet? What eyes, like skies, the bluer to lure your heart. What lips, that grips, the redder, the better you like from the start. If you want an angel near you, call her out and she will hear you. Is she that way lovable and sweet?
we go. That was a selection of British dance bands from the 1929, the year 1925. It's the 1929 dozen, finishing with the four bright sparks, a melody divine, a waltz. Don't play that many waltzes on 160, but usually sort of favour the upbeat tracks in the dance band selections, but that's okay. It's good. We've got variety here tonight. All right, we'll change tack now. We'll hear the third in the series on 3DB. It's a retrospective of 3DB put together by Mr. Newton, Mr. Burt, in 1987. He did this. It's looking back 60 years at the station, and I've been really enjoying it, actually. It's been fantastic to hear this, and it's sort of brought things into sharp relief because I didn't really there was sort of a lot of episodes about 3DB which I hadn't quite connected with, and this has been quite an education. There we go. All right, it's cued. It's on a cassette, and I think I'm right to go. I just have to get that switched in, and I have to use this one with my toe because there's no room for things here, so some equipment is done by foot. So we'll get the toe in place and we'll have a listen to 3DB and care of Mr. Newton for the next hour or so, I think. vk3sl testing.
When someone celebrates their 60th birthday and they look back over the years, the most fun is in remembering the good times. But if you're honest with yourself, you have to acknowledge the not-so-good times too, for reasons of balance, if for no other motive. And the same goes for a radio station. We've talked about the goldmine years of the 40s, 50s and 60s, but it's no secret to the radio industry in Melbourne, and indeed to the listening public, that the extraordinary success stories from our past have not been as forthcoming in the 70s and 80s. 3DB for 30 years was considered the most successful single broadcasting station in Australia. But then came the harder years. Harder in terms of retaining our success, and then the battle to regain our success. In the harder years, there have been many personalities who've carried the mantle of their predecessors with great dedication and ability, but with the monumental acceptance of television, the retirements and deaths of former stars, the increase from 8 AM broadcasting channels in 1975 to in excess of 20 available today on both AM and FM bands, we no longer have it all our own way. Not only is the competition big in numbers, but it's at its most competitive ever in quality. In some ways, it could be seen that we're paying for our runaway success for all those decades. The big boy was taken on by former opponents it used to wipe the floor with. But now it was our turn to be up against the ropes. And while we've had a lot of good people in our corner, it just wasn't enough. Everyone has a theory on what went wrong. As a listener, I remember many good things still happening. DB pioneered talkback radio with Barry Jones, now a member of the Bob Hawke government, and Gerald Lyons scooped away from the ABC. But what did go wrong? Again, purely as a listener, it just seems to me that it's more than a coincidence that there was a definite change in listener climate when John Eden was taken from his breakfast program back in 1975. If it wasn't the cause, perhaps it was at least a symptom. We talk about these things today simply because we'd be weak to ignore them. Speaking of John Eden, this is his theory.
Well, I think about 15 years ago, we started to fall down management-wise. And then the station started to disintegrate a bit. And then we let the young predators in. And before long, they were quarrying the place and seeing us as being an opportunity on the way to television. But management let the station down very badly in the last 15 years.
Bill Collins has his thoughts.
I think we were probably too good in the 50s and early 60s, and we became complacent. Now, I believe our sales department at 3DB became order takers, because I know quite often, as you know, you just couldn't get on the station at one stage, and people would ring up, a sponsor would ring up and say something, oh, well, we haven't got anything, we'll put you on the list and contact you. Then came the time when we tried to contact people and they'd gone somewhere else. And that was the start of the fall there, I believe. And I think all of us, practically right through the station, had become so complacent that we were the top and we didn't have to do much about it. It just happened that we suddenly became challenged in all areas And also, there was a bit of an economic recession in the 60s, in the early 60s, and I think this also hit at the advertising. We weren't prepared to fight back. And it was a very, very sad period. And also, it was getting to the stage, I suppose, where we were losing a lot of our stars, such as a couple of football teams might do all at once. You lose 4 or 5 of your top players all at once, and suddenly you're back in the centre of the field or towards the bottom. I think this may have happened to us also.
Lawrence Costin, by virtue of his 30-year service to 3DB, has earned his say.
Well, I think one of the main reasons I've always considered was that we moved from being what was termed a family station or a family sound to try and compete with, shall we say, a more younger sound. 3DB, as you know, was a family station. They had this great intimacy with their listeners, which they held for years and years and years. And in the early 70s, it was suggested that 3DB's listeners were 50 and over. And it was of the opinion that those people 50 and over were not what was required in what, shall we say, the new 3DB. They felt that they did not buy the products that were advertised, that they would not have the money that the younger people would have to buy the various products that may be advertised on the air. And so they turned around the complete format of the station to a much younger sound. And I think this great turnaround caused most of the older listeners to move to other stations. And as there were already 2 or 3 stations on the commercial dial that played young music and had got a head start, they stayed there, with the result that we neither got the older nor did we get the younger listeners, and we were in between. And I think this was the major reason why we moved away from that family-type sound to a younger sound that caused the rift.
One of the shining hopes of those grey years was a young announcer who first joined 3DB in 1965, while the station was still enjoying its place at the top. And he stayed for 16 years and became known as the angry young man of radio. Dennis Scanlon.
Bert, my first memory is, it's gone now, but I was in the old 3DB when I started, where the Herald loading docks are now, or part of the loading docks in Flinders Street. It was a dreadful old building, but it was loaded with atmosphere. And I used to was hired to do the Midnight to Dawn show, and we used to do that not in the main studio, but a little studio downstairs, where there was no air conditioning. In summertime, you virtually sat there in your jackets, and in winter, you sat there huddled over a 1-bar radiator. But it was fun at those days, Bert. We had a great team there. We had John Eden, of course, was doing breakfast. David Johnson was there. He was doing mornings. Lawrence Costin, Charles Scase. And I'd come from 3XY, which is basically a music station, to the then personality station of Melbourne. And in those days, they were rating number 1. And I was a bit overawed at first, but I just remember the unbelievable warmth that people like John Eden showed me, and the guidance that people like John Eden showed me. And it was fun. Even though the amenities were diabolical, it was a fun time.
While Dennis was here, the station went for that change of audience that Lawrence spoke about.
And we tried to get the young people. We tried to update the music, but we sort of did it in a schizophrenic fashion. We still had talk back between 9 and 11, and we'd follow 2 hours of talk back with Led Zeppelin. So if we were going after young people, we didn't do it properly. But it was my opinion that we shouldn't have worried about young people. We sort of had the image of a family station, a part of Melbourne, like 2UE was in Sydney. And I think that was the start of it, Bert. We virtually said to everyone over 40 years of age, look, 3DB is going to change. We don't want you. They left us. We didn't get the younger people because they had the idea of 3DB being this family station, perhaps appealing to an older audience. So we didn't get them, and we just told the very loyal listeners that we had virtually to go jump in the lake. So I think that was start of the rot, Bert, that we tried to chase the young people, and our traditional audience we said goodbye to.
If Dennis Scanlon was the angry young man, the overwhelming vote for the crazy young man of DB in the 70s would have to go to this gentleman.
So, I see that 3DB has 60 candles on its birthday cake. Well, I hope the fire brigade has the cake under control. Hello, this is Rick Melbourne. Yes, I was with 3DB for 5 of those 60 years, 1975 through to 1980. I remember Mr. Murray, Mr. Lee Murray, mine and everyone else's announcing teacher, saying to me,
"One day, son, I'm going to get you into 3DB, but despite the fact, son, that you don't barrack for Collingwood."
Ah, dear Mr. Murray. Well, he was right. But I didn't join 3DB until 1975, some 10 years after his prophecy. And true to my radio career, it was through a revolution. Gone was the call sign 3DB. In its place, a star-spangled logo which read DB Music. Ah, yes, we spared no expense. We hired Chelsea Brown to sing the jingles. Chelsea Brown. Funny, isn't it? Today it sounds like a fence stain. They put me on. I'm pleased to say I went from 6 points up to 15.7 in the first year. Been a while since 3DB hit those figures. Oh, but to this day, I certainly do thank you, the people of Melbourne. It was an exciting time for Melbourne radio. Yet it was more than that. New music was emerging. Remember? We called it disco.
Rick's stay at 3DB the first time around was to be short-lived. His departure from the station to join 3KZ was headline news. It's over 10 years ago since it happened, and there are various versions of the story told. As I remember being told by the then program manager, Brendan Sheedy, he, Brendan, was invited by Rick and a couple of the blokes to meet at a Melbourne hotel. Brendan accepted the invitation to find that the reason for the rendezvous was a mass resignation. Rick, his newsman Robert Hicks, the Midnight to Dawn announcer Ron O'Neill, and DB's morning personality Ted Bull were flying the coop, landing on the Trades Hall, home then to 3KZ. This is how Rick remembers it.
It was about this time that old Mother 3DB and I had a fallout. I think it was about money. But then again, I'm not the first disc jockey for this to happen at any radio station, am I? Thank you. Well, of course, this is what triggered the great radio raid. It's now history, but a deal was drawn up that saw myself going to another said radio station as program director and breakfast announcer. Well, I very sadly told my newsman of my intentions, and he signed up at once. As did the morning 9 to 12 announcer. Well, he'd been fired anyway, along with the afternoon announcer. And it suddenly dawned on me, with all these people leaving en masse along with myself, 3DB would be without an entire daytime lineup. Oh, Melbourne, what have you done? Well, when the news broke in the press, utter mayhem, and they have never seen that again. Someone called us pirates. Yes, I suppose we were, so we became pirates. Playing the hits and having a lot of fun. They were outrageous days. True, we did bring about some radio changes that influenced the business then and even today. We expanded the music list, and frankly, in one word, we dared. We dared to do and try a lot of new things, and the great radio raid actually did more good than harm. Well, we went out to functions, we were in our pirate outfits and installed a parrot in the foyer of this particular radio station. Actually, I think it's still working there today. It's probably due for long service leave, is it? All the press shots were done aboard the Polly Woodside. And here's something interesting. For the first time in the history of Melbourne, the Jolly Roger was hoisted above the Trades Hall building where our studios were. It was rewarding to see stars like Charlton Heston leaving our studios wearing an official eye patch. Well, dear old 3DB, after a while, all was forgiven. And what was headlined as the Great Radio Raid number 2 saw all of us returning back to the alma mater, back to DB Music.
DB Music. Just one of the many call signs the station has used in the last 15 years. And perhaps that's a clue to the real problem. Too many call signs and too many formats in too few years. Just as a PS to what we can call 3DB's difficult years, let's hear again what Ron Casey had to say earlier.
I think that probably 3DB was just a little slow to adjust to television.
Words worth hearing again, because the man in question, Ron Casey, has made an indelible mark in both radio and television. But in fairness to the 3DB of 1956, when television was about to begin, perhaps television was to blame in more ways than one for a general radio decline. It was taking some of our best people, Eric Pierce, Graham Kennedy, Jeff Cork, Bob Horsfall, Hal Todd, Roland Strong, Jack Little, Ernie Sigley, and on the production side, Norm Spencer and Elf Potter, and many others. 3DB made a bigger contribution than any other Melbourne radio station to this new wonder, television. The first manager of Channel 7 approached Dan Webb to be one of its inaugural announcers. And this was at a time when the legendary Dave Worrell was still manager of 3DB. What was Dave's feeling?
Oh, very unhappy, because I'd been bowling along with a very happy breakfast session. It had been going very well, and I enjoyed doing it. And I didn't ask. I told them, because I'd been in touch with Keith Cairns, and so I said, you know, I had a job lined up at Channel 7, and I was going to leave. Very unhappy. It was the only time Dave got angry with me. He said, well, I hope you come a gutser. And I think I did in some ways in the early days of television, because I didn't do what I wanted to do. I didn't really enjoy television very much in the early days.
Why was Dan unhappy in those early days?
Oh, because I made the break to escape from radio, and I found it was radio with pictures. And nobody had any idea what television was all about. As time went by, I think things came good. There are certain highlights of my years in television, but there are an awful lot of lows.
But didn't Dan have his family to see him through those early days?
The switch to television nearly lost me my kids. It had a horrendous effect on my children, because whenever I went to school with them, or went to, a school fete or something like that, they could not stand the publicity, the autograph seekers. They wanted to hang on to my hand and that sort of thing. And we had some very torrid times.
And how was this situation resolved?
Well, I think it's only since they've become adults and we've been able to talk about it openly that it's resolved itself, really.
So there was a price to pay to get into television. Lots of problems, such as Dan's. But it's fact that every second radio man in Melbourne was knocking on the door. He wanted to be on the telly, with a couple of exceptions. John Eden, unlike his friend Dan, didn't want to make the switch. Any regrets?
No, I don't think so, because I always recognised that whilst I was a pretty good salesman, I was nothing to look at. And, my vanity came through the back pocket, and very frequently it was empty. So I was quite happy to go there and do things like the Hit Parade, which was an enormous success. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. I never ever took television very seriously. But, I was smart enough to know that as it got older and I got older, one of us was going to be exposed as being not too pretty. I mean, I had the roughest head that ever appeared on television, but I could sell, so I took the money, but I was quite happy to concentrate on radio, which I've always loved.
But DB's two biggest stars, Dick Cranbourne and John Stewart, did make the change and took their happy gang to Channel 7, without success. Their former radio producer, Norm Spencer, was now program director at Channel 9. Why did his old radio stars fail on television?
Badly produced. They could have worked, and could work very well. John Stewart was a natural for television. Cranny might have had a bit more problem, but he could have worked him. They tried to make them almost stick to scripts, and that's not their forte. It's like trying to make Graham or even yourself sometimes stick to a script. That's not what it's all about. It's getting the personality. They never got the personality out of Dick or John on television. And it was wrong, because both of them had a lot of stage experience.
No one enjoyed more television success than Graham Kennedy in the legendary In Melbourne Tonight. But rumour has it that Norm Spencer wanted Dick Cranbourne originally.
Yes, I wanted Dick at that time. I would have taken him if I could have got him, but I couldn't get him across. And I think I could have made him succeed much more, because we had a great rapport. It took a long while for me to get it, I must say that, because Dick had come up a very hard way too, and through the racing thing and everything else. But we had a great rapport in the finish, Dick and I, and I would have loved to have taken him with me.
Why didn't Dick take the chance?
Oh, he'd been at DB and the Herald. The Herald had an atmosphere about it in those days. No one wanted to leave it. It was like a home away from home, and it was. There's no doubt on that. I must tell you that I always said that they didn't pay well, but the only time they looked after you was when you were sick or dead.
A lovely line on which to move from the Channel 9 of the late 50s to the Channel 7 of that era. And 3DB was the radio station that gave Ron Casey his grounding in preparation for his magnificent television career, both on and off camera. How did 3DB prepare Ron in those early days?
I think I learnt a lot from Dave Worrell. As I mentioned earlier, he was I believe, a master showman in the business of radio. And a lot of the rules that were good for radio were good for television. His sense of organisation, he sent me into the program department at one stage to pick music for the breakfast session. And I used to have to go and submit the list every morning. And Dave had a great thing for music in the breakfast session. He wasn't all that keen on on what was the hit of the day. He said you had to give them something that they can hum.
Recently, under circumstances in which usually rumours hum and buzz, like a bolt out of the blue came the news that the old DB boy had retired as General Manager of Channel 7, bringing to an end a 43-year association with the Herald and Weekly Times through its media outlets. How does Ron feel now that the dust has settled?
Oh, I feel comfortable with it now. The heartburn's behind, and there was a bit of heartburn about it. And finally, when I made the decision last week, I suppose you could say at the last minute it was a fairly impulsive one. But I just think that it was appropriate. I've had a very good innings with the Herald and Weekly Times, and I think the whole direction of television is going to be through an upheaval, and there'll be a total new change of direction. I hope that I won't be that far away from the industry, but I just thought it was appropriate that perhaps I should make a change of direction at the same time. It seemed to be the comfortable time to do it.
And this is a comfortable time for me to do something, to pay tribute to the Ron Caseys and the Norm Spencers and the Alf Potters of this world, blokes who went from the turmoil of radio to the tumult of television with great success and with not too many scars. Whether recognised or not, 3DB played a very important role in the pioneering of the medium that was to become its short-term enemy. And so many of our boys proved themselves in both mediums. We've spoken of 3DB and its variety, the station and its stars, its news, its sport. But there's one ingredient in the early days of DB that more than paid its way and helped build the enviable reputation of the station: drama. Lux Radio Theatre, Address Unknown, Dr. Paul, Courtship and Marriage, Lavender Grove, Dad and Dave, Martin's Corner, When a Girl Marries, and the best known of all, D24. This was real theatre of the mind stuff. Australian radio drama was considered the best in the world, and from its earliest days too, even when we did a local Australian version of an American idea.
The distributors of black and white cigarettes now have pleasure in presenting their weekly feature, The March of Time.
The man who announced the March of Time was the man who was to become one of our most respected radio and television actors, Keith Eden, who joined 3DB in 1935.
So I took this job on at £3 a week as a radio announcer and did the narration of the March of Time, which was the biggest at that particular time nationwide news broadcast prior to the war, where Hitler was involving himself all over the place, so it was very dramatic times. And I did these very fast narrations like Graham McNamee of the American counterpart of that particular type of thing. They had a litigation about this, I think. We called it the March of Time, and we found we weren't allowed to call it the March of Time, so it finished up as Time Marches On. And so we stayed with the world events for the past 7 days, brought to you a living drama, a quickly changing panorama of humour and tragedy as time marches on, you know. That was the tag to it.
Back in those early years, they were sticklers for authenticity. Here's proof of that from Keith Eden.
They hired a bloke called George Harland, who at one time was the biggest producer of Williamson's. He was tremendous, old George, and they put him on the staff. And one of the cast in that particular time was a fellow called Fred MacDonald, who was the original Dave in Dad and Dave, and they made the film with Bert Bailey. And old George was a great realist for effect, so he had a great big, enormous tub in the studio, a great big, enormous tub it was, filled with water. And we're doing a thing called Buccaneer Bay. And in the course of it, of course, some of them had to walk the plank. So old George, being a realist, he had a plank lined up in the studio floor, that small studio upstairs, it was very small, lined up there, and Fred had to walk the plank. And Fred said, "What do I do when I get to the end of it?" He said, "You jump in the water." So Fred Dewey just walked up this plank and went boom into this great big barrel, and this splash sound came. He was a fantastic bloke, old George Harland. He was a great producer for Williamson's.
And speaking of producers, the one name that's absolutely synonymous with drama in Australia is Hector Crawford. He first came to real prominence in plays and serials produced by him and his sister Dorothy for broadcast on 3DB.
Then Hector came into it. We had this jobbing house in Market Street at Broadcast Exchange. He was a manager. And after a period of time, he decided he'd produce his own programs, and Dorothy became the director. And she learned from the actors. There was a sort of a close sort of cell of actors. There were about half a dozen of us who'd old stage actors and people like that who'd learnt radio. And she didn't know anything about that part of it then. So she didn't say a word for quite, say, 6 months. But she learned from their technique. And then she began to develop her production technique from what she'd learned from the actors. And she became the best director of serials, radio serials, of any of them. By far the best.
His Worship, Mr. Canning, the stipendiary magistrate who's hearing this case, has taken his place in chambers, and the case is about to recommence.
Evidence against O'Brien, past heard. John Henry O'Brien.
John Henry O'Brien, the witness who was giving evidence in the last session, has now taken his position in chambers, and the cross-examination by Mr. Wade for the applicant will continue.
Mr. O'Brien, prior to the adjournment of the court, we were concerning ourselves with the conversation you had with Lloyd Bennett on the morning of June the 8th, after the tennis club dance at which he announced his engagement to Margaret Evans, the applicant in this case. You remember that?
And that was Keith Eden in an excerpt from an early Crawford production called Consider Your Verdict, which in 1957 found its way to TV. It's been mentioned already the quality of our Australian actors. For verification, Roland Strong, who with Crawford Productions wrote, produced, narrated and acted in some of their best-known productions.
Now, 3DB used to start about till 8:30 in the morning and go through till midday, virtually with quarter-hour blocks of serial. So it was a whole morning, every week, every day, every week, playing radio serials. Well, that meant a lot of radio serials. Fortunately, we made a lot of them. And it was very big indeed. We have, I believe, the best radio actors in the world, and I say that without hesitation. That's a pretty big statement. But people like Doug Kelly, Keith Eden, Patricia Kennedy, I could name them all. But we had the best actors in the world, and sometimes the best scripts. Better than America, better than England, and it was a pretty big business.
The most successful of all Crawford production dramas was the show that was to become the forerunner of television's Homicide, Division 4 and Matlock Police.
D24. From the files of the Victoria Police, for the first time come these true stories of unceasing war against crime, of day and night vigilance that protects our life and our property, and of the nerve center of the Police Information Bureau, D24.
Hello, D24. There's a policeman lying in the middle of the road in High Street, St Kilda. He's been shot.
The narrator, of course, was Roland Strong. D24 was the most successful radio drama ever heard in Melbourne. In the 1950s, 70% of radio listeners each Tuesday evening at 8:30 were tuned to 3DB.
Yeah, about 5 out of 6 people, I think, who were tuned to radio were listening to D24. Well, it was true stories. We had a policeman on the staff, virtually, seconded to us from the police force, and they gave us factual stories, in the actual briefs, the actual court depositions, and we made the story out of that. So it was true, and it impressed people very much.
Good morning, sir.
Morning. And do you buy this sort of thing?
An old wash copper, eh?
Might be old, but it's in good condition.
Looks all right.
How much will you give me for it?
Let me see now. £3.
Ah, break it down. It's worth twice that much.
Not to me, it isn't. Not much demand for this kind of thing, you know.
Make it £4.
I'll make it 3.5.
All right. But I still don't think it's enough.
Try somewhere else if you like.
No, I haven't got time. Give us the dough, will you?
All right. 1, 2, 3 pounds, 10 shillings. There you are.
Thanks. See you again.
Oh, just a minute.
Huh?
I'll have to enter it up in the book.
What for?
Oh, we have to do that, you know.
Righto.
You give me your name and address, I'll enter it up.
Colin Evans.
Colin Evans.
14 Elfin Grove.
14 Elfin Grove.
Balaclava.
Balaclava. And now sign here.
Okay. There you are.
Thanks.
Sure.
Nothing unusual about that transaction, was there? The second-hand dealer Martin put the wash copper into stock and forgot all about it. But a week or so later, he was in the back room of his shop when his young assistant brought him a surprising piece of information.
Hi, Mr. Martin?
Yes, Bill.
There's a man out there says he wants to see you in a hurry.
What about?
Oh, he says you bought a wash copper from him the other day. Now he's got another one to sell.
Another wash copper? It's funny.
Why?
Well, last time he didn't think I gave him enough for it. Yet now he's back with another one.
Well, what'll I tell him?
Tell him to wait a few minutes. I don't like the look of this. You keep him there while I ring the police.
The police?
Yeah. Won't do any harm to check up.
Well, what'll I talk to him about?
Just ask him some of the questions you're always asking me.
Oh, yeah, righto.
And shut the door after you.
Yeah, righto.
Great memories of a wonderful drama series. Of course, with such a phenomenal success as D24 on their hands, Roland Strong and all associated would have been financially made for life.
Oh, yes. Well, you'd imagine so, wouldn't you? With a rating of 70%, did you say, 70? Yes, I got a grand total, I think, for doing a lot of it. In fact, practically all of it. £18 a week. Well, that's hardly retiring allowance, is it?
Only names, place names, and dates were altered in this true story. It was dramatized from the files of the Victoria Police by Roland Strong, who now says goodbye until the same time next week, when there'll be another true story in this series, D24, which was produced in the studios of Hector Crawford Productions by Dorothy Crawford.
Another dramatic series on 3DB, but admittedly not with the huge national success of D24, was The Faker-McGangeys. And this is its theme. And I can hear you saying now, the Faker-who? The Faker-McGangeys was a group of children who had daily adventures in the children's program conducted by a wonderful lady called Jean Lawson. And no tribute to the station's 60 years of broadcasting would be complete without saluting her. Jean Lawson joined 3DB in the late 30s, and for 21 years produced and compared one of the most articulate, intelligent and entertaining children's programs ever heard in Melbourne. Its features included a junior naturalist club conducted by the well-loved Crosby Morrison. The program had its own magazine, Patchwork Press, its own stamp club, and there were outside broadcasts from theatres, museums, yachts, and even from the hallowed turf of the Melbourne Cricket Ground. And 3 days a week, the continuing story of the Faker-McGangeys. In this, Jean gave a start to many aspiring actors and actresses, including Louis Viander, currently touring Australia with Rex Harrison and Claudette Colbert, and due to return to his highly successful career in London. Beverly Dunn, one of Australia's most versatile actresses in theatre, radio and television. And the internationally acclaimed Zoe Caldwell. She started in Jean's beloved Faker-McGangeys. All of Jean's children's programs were live to air, and unfortunately, to the best of our knowledge, there is no recorded material in existence. And that's a pity. I was lucky enough to be one of the children chosen to appear in the Fakamaganges. I played the role of banjo, and I remember the fun to this very day. But I especially remember the late Jean Lawson, who died last year. She was one of the kindest and most elegant people you could ever meet. And she was also one of the finest radio broadcasters this city has ever known.
This is vk3sl Test Missions on 160. We're listening to a retrospective on 3DB. I've just been listening while preparing the pesto. Here we go. Side 2, ready to go. I think.
Gather round me, children, and I'll tell a story of the mountains in the days when guns was law. When two families got disputing, it was bound to end in shooting. Listen closely and I'll tell you what I saw.
The last of the hillbillies, Bob Dyer, became the first of the true national radio stars. And for a long time, DB was his Melbourne home.
They would shoot each other quicker than it takes your eye to flicker. They could knock a squirrel's eye out at 90 feet.
The buzzer was first.
While the iron is hot.
While the iron is hot, that's 1 point for the spinster. And the bell came in but a second. All right.
That's correct.
That's right. Now here, he agrees, but a little bit too late for himself. Now here's the second question. There's 1 point for the spinster. 3 out of 5 wins the chance to hit the jackpot. How many days are there in leap year? The bell.
366.
Oh, yes, indeed. I'm glad you went up to 66. The score is now 1-1. 1 for the spinster and 1 for the bachelor.
And that is very early Bob Dyer. Of course, to follow that, he had great success with Pick-a-Box. He had great success in television. And the argument still goes on. Bob Dyer or Jack Davy, who was the greater? Well, they were both great, each with their specialised talents. Perhaps this is a good opportunity to call a truce and simply remember them both as stars of a very special era. Bob Dyer may have been our first American star, but he certainly wasn't our last. 3DB was multicultural long before anyone knew what the term meant. While other radio stations in Australia were hiring announcers who could sound American, 3DB hired from America the voice of the Legion Stadium Wrestling, Jack Little. He was brought exclusively to 3DB as compere of the Greys game. The late Jack Little, one of the most popular men in the industry, went on to compere many other programs, including Magazine of the Air, which was a latter-day version of Monty Blandford's Philosopher's Scrapbook. Jack joined the exodus from radio and began his long career at Channel 9 in 1957. Little Jack Little, as he was known in America, died in the country of his adoption, Australia, in 1985, leaving behind a lot of happy memories sprinkled with his famous catch cries. How about that? And that's all there is. There isn't any more. And then there was Mike. Canadian Mike Dyer, who also went on to television like Jack, started his radio career in Australia at 3DB, like Jack. Mike was a great devotee of jazz. He began a program called Sound Study, which introduced to late-night listening some jazz artists and material not previously heard on DB. Cupid struck at DB many times over the years, and many met their match and spouse at the station. Mike was one of them. He married the lovely Judy Tilton. Judy Dyer reminisces about how Mike got his job and how they met.
Dave Worrell hired Mike, and because the Canadians had been very kind to Dave when he'd made his trip to... Dave! Here I am saying Dave. It was always Mr. Worrell, sir. But I'll be forgiven, I think. And he got the job as a disc jockey on All Night Show. And that's how he started. And then I went down with it for a publicity shot. Is where I first met Mike, and Dan Webb and he were playing table tennis, and Mary McLaughlin and myself had to stand there, 2 attractive DB lasses, which Laurie Richards, our photographer, used to come in, and we always had to point the finger, and that was the the meeting with Mike.
Mike Dyer lost his life in a tragic swimming accident on January the 8th, 1978. And with his passing, the industry mourned the man who brought to radio and television an innate sense of good taste and good music. Here's Mike closing off from his final sound study in the year 1971. And note how terminology has changed over the years.
There are many thanks to offer all around to the record companies who have been so cooperative with new releases and for having the foresight to stay with the moderns. To Kevin Coleman at Hartley's for making records available to me. To all those people who have written and loaned recordings in the past. To engineers and turntable boys here at 3DB who've made the job easier. And especially to Don Pruser, who operated our first program and our last one tonight. To those of you who stayed with Sound Study on and off for those 217 editions and provided encouragement by doing so. And finally, to all those people who believe in jazz in general and modern sounds in particular. We hope you keep up your fine works and let others know about the many good things in jazz. Until sometime then, this is Mike Dyer saying stay gay, thanks for listening, and trusting you'll be on hand whenever and wherever classes should reassemble. Goodbye and thank you from Sound Study.
In producing this 3-hour radio special to celebrate 60 years of broadcasting on the station, it was a pleasant necessity to speak to as many people as possible who were associated with 3DB over the years. If I had to choose two of the memories that I take away with me, they'd undoubtedly be, one, that DB built its reputation as a family station, and secondly, everyone, without exception, paid special tribute to this man.
Good evening, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to have this little chat with you on the eve of this, our greatest race. The statement that it is possible to back a horse to win more money in the Melbourne Cup than in any other race in the world remains as true today as it was when said by Mr. Sol Green nearly 20 years ago. But it is not only because of this that the Melbourne Cup maintains its place as one of the premier racing attractions in the world. It is because it has become a national institution in Australia and will remain so come what may.
That was the voice, the magnificent voice of Eric Welsh. It's Eric who stands out in everyone's memory as a very special talent and the most important ingredient in the 3DB success story. Eric Welsh was born in Clifton Hill. He went to school at the Gold Street State School, and with no disrespect to Bill Collins, Bert Bryant and Brian Martin, it seems strange that a race caller moved on to Melbourne High and then Melbourne University. Eric did. He was a reporter on the Melbourne Argus in 1926 when 3LO engaged him to cover racing and wrestling broadcasts. He left the ABC dramatically in 1933 amid a flurry of controversy, and the next year, 1934, saw him here. He began his outstanding 20-year career with 3DB. It wasn't only his ability as a race caller that carves his name indelibly into our history, but his versatility and the admiration for him from his peers.
Well, he was worthwhile as a race caller because it made 3DB a racing station. And, well, in those days, it was all hands to the pump. Everybody sort of went into all the programs and helped on all the jobs. They just didn't take the one job. Everybody worked together. One of the cleverest programs that DB ever ran was Information Please. And he conducted that, and he answered the questions promptly. A number of people, of course, said that he had access to the questions beforehand, but he didn't. He would memorise pages of the encyclopedia to keep his mind trained.
Maury Callard remembers Eric.
Well, he was an amazing person. There's no doubt about it. His memory was phenomenal. I remember one time I was sitting in my office and Eric came in and he was talking about something or other, and I said, look, there's one thing I admire about you, Eric. You remember things. And he said, oh, yes. He said, I'm one of those fortunate people, if you like. I've almost got a photographic memory. And I said, oh, don't be silly. He said, righto, I'll prove it to you. And I had a book in front of me, an ordinary book. So he said, open it. So I opened it and he said, see that page there? He said, I'll read it, to himself, which he did. And he said, now you read it. And he said, and I read it and I put it down, and he said, you start reading it aloud to me. And I did. And he said, stop. And he went on and he read the next 5 lines. He said the next 5 lines. I thought to myself, Godfather. And then over the years, I can remember his Anzac marches and all of those things. They were absolutely superb.
In both radio and television, producer Norm Spencer has seen and worked with them all.
Oh, Welsh has got to be one of the greatest.
This is a test transmission from vk3sl.
He set the standard for all race callers in this country. I heard it once described, he brought culture to racing, and I thought that was a pretty good comment. But not only that, we had things like information, please. We had all the professors and all the experts. And Eric originally was there as a sporting man, and John Stewart used to be the compere. And they go right through the whole thing, and no, they couldn't. What about you, Eric? Well, now, I can remember in 1923 such and such, and he'd be boom, right, and he had a photographic memory. And later, as I became a friend of his, I learnt he used to read the paper right through, and the whole thing would be photographed in his mind.
Here now is Eric Welsh from the broadcast of Information Please.
Eric, now that there is so much talk of famous horses, we might recall the famous Ajax, who, after 18 successive victories, was beaten. Who beat him?
Spear Chief. Ajax was 40-1 on, and Spear Chief beat him at Rose Hill in Sydney.
That's correct in all details. Thank you, and 5 shillings to the Western Australian Centre. J. Shine of Bunbury.
Admiration for Eric Welsh extended beyond Bunbury and Western Australia.
Jack Little, the late Jack Little, took a tape, not a tape, I guess it was a recording in those days, and probably an old acetate, back to the States of Eric's call of a Melbourne Cup. And they didn't believe it. They couldn't believe that this was a real thing happening. They, thought it was stooged because it was so fast. Used to the, and here comes Beetle Bomb, and that sort of slow pace. And I think all race callers owe, a hell of a lot to Eric.
However, Russia dashed to the front at the 2 furlongs post and went away looking likely to open up a winning lead. Leonard is chasing him, followed by Concerto and Carey coming home at a great rate, and then Earl Mond, and On Target right out in the centre of the course, but coming on the scene too late, and a furlong from home you can say that Russia has the race safely won. Carey is finishing on gamely, but far too late, and Russia strode in by a great margin. Russia first. And On Target or Carey second. 4th is Leonard, followed then by Prince Standard, Knockalo, Chair Pledgett, followed by first in Gallant Gentleman, 2 Grand Spam, Oatcake, Punctilier, Proctor, and at the head of the others is Cordale, the favourite, and then coming Miss Prim and Flying Duke, and the last to finish were Logical, Sthenelaus, Sherry Marie, Queen Midas, and Rubontine and Magnificent and Chief Pilot. They all seemed to get the stitch and were pulled up very shortly after passing the post. Number 1, Russia, D. Munro, was the winner of the Melbourne Cup.
One of those race callers referred to by Jeff Cork as owing Eric Welsh a lot is our own Bill Collins, who readily admits it.
Well, filling his shoes was very, very difficult and very awesome to me because he was a legend to me before I met him, and I found him to be a great person. For a start off, Eric Welsh had the best voice that I've ever heard anywhere. And I'm not talking about broadcasting races. I'm talking about doing programs like Reflections in a Wine Glass and Information Please and these sort of things. It was the most magnificent voice. He was a very, very clever man. Apart from broadcasting his races, he was able to do all these programs, and his general knowledge for a show like Information Please was, quite outstanding. It was really remarkable. He was an easy man to get along with, loved his beer and his cigarette, was one of the boys, loved to tell stories, of experiences that had gone past, and really made you feel at home.
Sad to say, Eric's great talent wasn't recognised in financial terms. Dan Webb.
Later on, I found out that Eric Welsh had been asking for 9 years for an increase and had failed to get it. And when Eric went down to Mornington and bought his pub, the story was that the chairman of the Herald said, "Look, Eric, stay with us. You can write your own ticket. It's just that your applications for money have been forgotten or overlooked." He was the greatest broadcaster Australia's ever known.
The greatest broadcaster ever known, as described then by Dan Webb, died on the 25th of July 1983 at the age of 82. He leaves behind him memories of a great race caller, some say the best ever, a man with that unbelievable memory we've talked about, a commentator who brought the annual Anzac Day parades into our homes via radio and television for over 20 years, and memories of Friday and Saturday nights at the boxing and wrestling, describing everything he saw so vividly that we really believed we were there. Dan Webb knew Eric in both his great years and his last years.
Eric Welsh was like a father to me because, you see, I'd come out here from England and I had no father. Eric Welsh was a fantastic man. He had worldly wisdom. He'd had an unhappy marriage. So as a youngster who was involved in certain flirtations in those days, he could give me advice. He was so knowledgeable about everything. It wasn't just sport. He knew about music, he knew about politics, he knew about geography. He had a fantastic brain. And, you know, I saw Eric right up till months before he died. He used to visit him down at Mount Martha, where he was in the nursing home there. I was broken-hearted, Boo, when I saw him. He was reduced to a guy who slobbered and knew that he slobbered, and it was just so sad because he had such pride, such a fantastic man. I took him once across to the Hastings pub, and he had friends over there, old jockeys and racecourse people, you know. And, you know, they all stood up to a man when I walked into the pub, and they applauded him. And the old boy was hanging onto my arm, and he said, "Give us a chair, Dan, I can't stand up anymore." He was a great bloke, Eric Welsh.
In July last year, 3DB had a new beginning. Another concerted effort was made to lift the station which was once seen as the flagship of Melbourne radio. Many attempts had been made before in the last 15 years. There were music formats, talk formats, racing formats, no racing formats, formats with a little racing, formats with a lot of racing. While other stations found their corner of the sky, 3DB searched for its identity, or at least some part of its former glory. Perhaps the real new beginning began on December 3rd last year, when the media show of shows began, and 3DB was right in the middle of it.
3DB Newsflash.
Media tycoon Rupert Murdoch has gained almost certain ownership of the Herald and Weekly Times in a move that will create Australia's largest media empire. Apart from the print holdings of the Herald and Weekly Times, radio station 3DB will be included in the package.
Perth tycoon Robert Holmes à Court has launched a $2 billion counterbid for the Herald and Weekly Times. The bid is $13 a share, or $1 more than the offer by Rupert Murdoch. Chief Executive John Dawson.
Rupert Murdoch has virtually won control of the Herald and Weekly Times by negotiating an agreement with Robert Holmes à Court. Damien Comerford reports.
Under the deal, Mr Murdoch will get most of the Herald and Weekly Times, and Mr Holmes à Court will add Channel 7 in Melbourne and the West Australian newspaper group to his empire. 3DB's future is still unclear. Mr Holmes à Court stands to make...
Gary Stokes is the new owner of Radio 3DB. Mr Stokes has paid $110 million for a media package that includes 3DB, 3GL, Channel 7 in Adelaide and South Australian radio stations.
The Australian Broadcasting Tribunal has launched an inquiry to establish whether News Limited was foreign-controlled. The tribunal inquiry had the potential to undo Kerry Stokes' deal to buy 3DB. However, the tribunal agreed to adjourn proceedings to allow the Herald Board time to dispose of its electronic assets.
The Herald and Weekly Times announced it will auction its electronic assets, including 3DB. The board chairman, John Dawson, says the deadline for tenders of the assets is 5 o'clock tomorrow night, February the 5th. The decision means Robert Holmes à Court and Kerry Stokes will have to submit new bids for Channel 7.
The carve-up of the electronic assets of the Herald and Weekly Times has now been completed. John Fairfax paid $320 million to buy HSV7 Melbourne. Kerry Stokes increased his bid for the 4 radio stations, including 3DB and 3GL, as well as Channel 7 in Adelaide. Mr Stokes paid $130 million, 12.5 of that for 3DB.
And so another chapter began. In 60 years of broadcasting, 3DB has spent most of her life at the top of the tree, with her great glorious years being the 30s, 40s, 50s and 60s. In the 1970s and 1980s, perhaps the old girl has shown a little too much petticoat, sometimes worn a touch more makeup than she needed, and found that some of her late lamented lovers were not always replaced by new suitors who fully understood her. There were those who wanted to change her so quickly and dramatically, she started reeling, not from excitement, but exhaustion. Of course, with due respect to this grand lady of broadcasting, she needed to change. Anyone who cares about radio should care about 3DB, because her history is as impressive, colourful and worthwhile as any station in Australia, perhaps the world. For most of her broadcasting life, she has known success, the likes of which most other stations could only dream. Whatever lies ahead, one thing is certain. When she regains her former status, when once more she rules the air, when she once again exerts her influence as a major broadcaster, it will be an entirely different era to those gone before. But in that success, during those good times ahead, if you listen very carefully, perhaps you'll hear the inspirations of her salad days, when laughter was king. When we waited obediently for the news.
I've just been informed that His Majesty King George VI died peacefully in his sleep at Sandringham.
When drama was real theatre of the mind.
You're badly hurt. I better call an ambulance.
When music had melody.
All night long the neighbors shout, cut it out, cut it out.
We learned from our peers.
He may have become captain later, but he was lieutenant at that stage.
We gave from the heart.
And 25 shillings from Kirsty Wyber of Dandenong.
We crowded around the Bakelite box on the first Tuesday in November.
And Old Rowley will win. Old Rowley first, Mike I second, and third.
It was a time when the voice from the speaker was a friend.
3DB Melbourne, 3 OK, Winram Valley, 11.5 minutes past 7 today is Monday, November the 27th, as we bid good morning to Geoffrey McComas.
Good morning, Jackson.
Morning, Mac. A tremendous weekend.
Yes, very good indeed.
Murray, please, a comedian is supposed to have hair on his head, not his jokes.
Well, you're missing out both ways.
How dare you?
That new hit tune by the American band leader and pianist Francis Craig, Beg Your Pardon, is still in 4th position.
He said to the stage manager, did my voice fill the theatre? And the stage manager said, well, I saw several people leaving to make room for it.
Fundamental reason for the stranding of those schools of blackfish whales has never been satisfactorily cleared up.
3DB Melbourne and 3LK Central Victoria, the Herald Sun stations.
This is Stephanie Des signing off, and I'm very sad to say goodbye to you. Good night, listeners.
And to our sick friends in hospital, we wish you a speedy recovery, and may God bless you all.
And they were just some of the great voices from 3DB's past. And now as Dick Cranbourne displays again the versatility of the old team by crooning The Way You Look Tonight. He represents a mighty team who have left a magnificent legacy of wonderful memories. They built the solid foundations of 3DB in its first 60 years. And for that, and much more, we salute them and we thank them.
Someday, when I'm awfully low, when the world is cold, I will feel a glow just thinking of you and the way you look tonight. Oh, but you're lovely, with your smile so warm and your cheek so soft. There is nothing for me but to love you, just the way you look tonight. With each word your tenderness grows, tearing my fear apart. And that laugh that wrinkles your nose touches my foolish heart. Lovely, never, never change. Keep that breathless charm. Won't you please arrange it? 'Cause I love you, just the way you look tonight. Just the way you look tonight.
3DB, the first 60 years, was written, narrated and produced by Bert Newton. Executive producer, Gerd Rowland.
Special thanks to Orm Slater, Bruce Wishart, Bill McLaughlin, Susie Bell, Angela Embleton, Clark Sinclair and Lenny Holmes. This has been a Melbourne's own 3DB production.
And there we have it. Get the right fader. There we have it. It's our retrospective on 3DB. We did it in 3 parts. It's a 3-cassette series put out in 1987. And Stephanie Dest and Totem Tom. There's so many tangents. Wonderful material. Okay, folks, you can tune in again tonight at 11:30. Frank and I will be doing something. We'll be having a nostalgia session, and there's a few interesting things lined up, so we'll discover them at 11:30 onwards tonight on the same frequency, and also on 2 meters at 147.475. Thank you, and we'll see you soon. vk3sl test missions.
We